By the fourth day, Alicia Kozakiewicz believed she was going to die in that basement. She was 13 years old, chained in a concrete room in a townhouse in Herndon, Virginia, and she had already spent days inside a nightmare that had started on a family computer back in western Pennsylvania. The man who held her there had filmed her, hurt her, and kept her trapped below his house while he moved through ordinary life above her. On January 4th, 2002, when she heard men coming down the stairs, she did not know they were there to save her. She thought they might be there to finish what her captor had started. Then FBI agents came through the basement and cut short a plan that, by her own account, was already moving toward murder. Alicia grew up in the Pittsburgh area and was, in many ways, like countless other young teenagers at the start of the internet chat room era. She spent time online, talked to people she believed were peers, and moved through digital spaces that adults in the early 2000s did not yet understand well. Over time, she was drawn into contact with someone she believed was a teenage girl named Christine. Later, she learned that Christine was actually an adult man. That deception did not end the contact. Instead, it led her farther in, until she was introduced in a Yahoo chat room to Scott Tyree, a man in Virginia who was decades older than she was. Tyree did not rush. According to later accounts, he groomed her for months, building trust carefully, speaking to her at night, and working around the watchfulness of a family who did not yet realize how real the danger had become. On New Year's Day in 2002, after a family dinner, Alicia left her home in Crafton Heights and went out to meet the person she had come to know online. She was still a child, and the person waiting for her was a 38-year-old predator who had already decided exactly what he wanted to do. Tyree got her into his vehicle and drove her away from Pennsylvania into Virginia. Once he brought her to his townhouse in Herndon, the crime moved from manipulation into captivity. He kept her in the basement for 4 days. During that time, he bound her, abused her, and recorded what he was doing. Federal court records later described video showing her in bondage and with signs of physical assault. This was not an improvised abduction. It was planned, organized, and driven by a man who had spent months steering a child into his reach. Back in Pennsylvania, her disappearance set off a desperate search. Her family and investigators had reason to suspect that the internet might be involved, and that suspicion turned out to be correct. As the search widened, Tyree made another catastrophic choice. He broadcast images from the basement online. One person watching from Florida recognized Alicia from missing child coverage, and flyers distributed through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Afraid of being implicated, the viewer contacted the FBI anonymously from a payphone. That tip changed everything. Investigators moved quickly, using information tied to Tyree's online identity to trace him to a specific address in Herndon. The search that had begun with a missing girl in Pennsylvania suddenly narrowed to one townhouse and one basement where time was running out. On January 4th, agents entered the home and found Alicia alive. She was rescued at about 4:10 in the afternoon. Tyree was arrested later that day at his workplace. The rescue happened only 4 days after the abduction, but those 4 days were enough to leave permanent damage. Alicia later said that when the agents came down the basement stairs, she thought they were men sent to kill her. That detail stayed with people because it showed how completely terror had taken over the space around her. Rescue did not arrive like relief at first. It arrived through fear, confusion, and the sudden collapse of the only world she had been seeing for days. Afterward, she was taken for medical care and then into protective custody before being reunited with her parents. The case drew national attention because it showed, in a way few cases had before, what online grooming could become in the physical world. Alicia was widely described as the first broadly reported victim of an internet-related child abduction in the United States. In court, Tyree pleaded guilty to traveling in interstate commerce with intent to engage in a sexual act with a juvenile and to sexual exploitation of a minor. In 2003, he was sentenced to 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. The legal record preserved some of the horror in formal language, but the formal language could not fully capture what those 4 days had done to a 13-year-old girl who had been tricked, taken across state lines, chained, and brutalized by an adult who had built the crime long before he committed it. While investigators worked, her family spent those days in a state no family ever forgot. Alicia had vanished on a winter holiday, and every hour without an answer widened the fear. The details that later became familiar to the public were not yet visible to them. They knew only that a 13-year-old girl was gone, that the internet might have something to do with it, and that distance made everything worse. When the FBI finally found her in Virginia, the rescue also proved something law enforcement had not yet been equipped to explain to many parents. A child could be taken from a house in Pennsylvania by someone who had first entered the home through a screen. The threat did not need a man in a van circling the block. It could arrive through typed messages, patience, and false identity. What came next was not a clean recovery. Alicia has spoken openly about the aftermath, including post-traumatic stress disorder and serious memory loss connected to the trauma. She also lived through something many survivors know too well. People asking how it had happened as if a child had somehow engineered her own victimization. In the early 2000s, public understanding of internet grooming was thin, and much of the reaction still carried the old instinct to blame the young person who had been manipulated. Alicia pushed against that. At 14, only about a year after she was rescued, she founded the Alicia Project. Later, she testified before Congress, advocated for stronger protections for children, and became a public voice on missing persons, online exploitation, and survivor recovery. She took the worst thing that had happened to her and turned it into work that might keep another child from walking into the same trap. The reason her story remained so powerful was not only that she survived, but how close she came to not surviving at all. By her own later telling, she understood during captivity that the man who held her intended to kill her. The FBI did not arrive after a long imprisonment or a lucky escape in the woods. They arrived in the final stretch of a planned crime, in a basement where a 13-year-old girl had already been isolated, chained, abused, and prepared for worse. That was what made her rescue so stark. It was not a recovery after the danger had passed. It was an interruption of the danger while it was still unfolding. Alicia Kozakiewicz grew up, studied psychology and forensic psychology, and built a life in public service and advocacy. But the story that still stops people cold began with a child sitting at a family computer and ended with federal agents entering a basement just in time. Between those points was a trail of deception that moved from chat rooms to a street near her home, from a vehicle crossing state lines to a locked room below ground. She survived because a witness decided to call, because investigators moved fast, and because the basement door opened before her captor could carry the crime to its planned end. For horrifying survival stories, what makes Alicia's case unforgettable is not only the cruelty of what was done to her. It is the fact that she was found alive in the last moments before the worst outcome became permanent, and then spent the rest of her life making sure other children understood the danger she had survived. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.